Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 832 podcast and a Merry Christmas to y'all. This is our first Christmas special because it's like 2 weeks ish. It's the 17th of December, so we're coming right up on Christmas, and we have Aria to come, celebrate the holiday with us.
Indeed.
And, yeah, Merry Christmas. Today, we're actually talking about the Star of Bethlehem.
Oh, right. Yeah. Because that whole thing was supposed to, coming up on the 21st, visible in certain parts of the world. You've got a convergence
Yeah, conjunction.
of, Jupiter and Saturn.
Right.
And all these people are talking about, we could see a Christmas star. Well, about that.
Right. So there's a documentary called The Star of Bethlehem. It's actually pretty neat. I'm gonna put Aria down real quick. It's pretty neat because this lawyer, around Christmas time, he had to decorate his yard,
Mm-hmm.
and he was like, "Well, we'll put out some wise men. Well, if you need a wise man, you need a star. Well, what does a star actually look like? What was that?" And so he kind of got fixated on that question.
Mm-hmm.
And he did all of this research, all this astronomical research and stuff, to figure that out.
Right.
And using like astronomy software and programs and stuff. He has a fairly good grasp of Kepler's law, like the three laws of planetary movement and all that.
It's not necessarily his grasp of it. It's that Kepler's law very accurately predicts the movement of the planets in the solar system. So much so that you can go back and forth in time using Kepler's law, go back far enough, and you can determine where the stars were at any given point. The fun part about it is now we have software that can track those movements mathematically better than someone with a pen and paper and some, map charts and stuff like that. So
Right, and it can in fact like animate it, so you
yeah,
can see it moving.
right. So I saw this years ago, and it blew my mind. And everybody who's talked to me about it said, who all the astronomers who looked at his data said, "Oh wow, that is very interesting because it makes total sense that the astronomical events that he was witnessing would have, based on how the the stargazers at the time would interpret it, would definitely lead people to believe that something important was going to happen in Jerusalem, and once they got there, I mean, in Judea, and when they got there in Bethlehem.
Right.
So,
Right, and a really neat thing is so the first thing that he talks about in the documentary, with like the important things going on at the start, is the conception of Jesus. When
right,
Gabriel tells Mary, "Hey, you're gonna have the Son of God," that was the conception of Christ,
right,
and there was a different thing happening in the sky then than when the wise men got there.
right,
And the neat thing with that is like, so there's Regis or Rex, which is like the king star,
mm-hmm.
and then there's Jupiter, and who's the king planet,
Right,
and made a zig and a zag, and it crown like it ended up drawing a bit of a crown on top of Regis.
why didn't it just like circle?
No, it didn't circle. It went because of like retrograde motion or whatever.
Uh-huh.
How planets move, it went like this, and then back up, do like that.
Got it.
So doing a bit of a crown
So
over Regis.
it retrograded three times.
Right. But
Rex did.
no, Jupiter did over Rex, drawing a bit of a crown over it, and under that was Virgo, the Virgin.
Got it.
So that helped represent um like a royal birth, royal conception
from a virgin,
from a virgin,
which
which
is
what happened.
right.
So that
So
was also a really neat thing.
indeed. So this is this Christmas special. He's been doing a series on misleading ministries, and so we just want to be clear that while Jupiter and Saturn coming into convergence like they are is going to look really neat and probably similar to what the Bethlehem star looked like at the time. Um, at that time, it was actually Jupiter and Venus coming into close contact to appear to be one star.
Right, and like what we just said with Jupiter and Regis, that's the king planet and the king star was the conception. Now we're moving into the birth when we see when the wise men are going to Bethlehem, and yeah, so it was the king planet and the mother planet Venus,
Mm-hmm.
coming together, and bolstering each other's light, and so that's just a neat thing. And it helped represent, a royal birth. And there were several things, in fact, 9 points that um, the documentary said, like, a star had to follow all of these, or a celestial body had to follow all of these to be the star that the wise men saw,
Mm-hmm.
to go to Bethlehem. And so they had to represent birth, which with the conception it was the constellation Virgo. And with this, the star or celestial bodies that they saw to go to Bethlehem, it was the planet Venus and Jupiter coming together. It had to represent the Jewish nation, which in the constellation Leo, Regis is part of that constellation. So in the conception of Christ,
Mm-hmm.
it was representing the Jewish nation, Leo, the house of Judah. That lion, the lion is the house animal. It also had to rise in the east
Mm-hmm.
ahead of them. It had to appear at a certain time.
Mm-hmm.
It had to endure over a certain time.
Mm-hmm.
It had to stop over Bethlehem. And it couldn't have been known by Herod.
Right.
And so what this guy found matched all of that. And he took like clues from the Bible and saw that they aligned up with what was happening in the sky at that time. So all of these things coming together means something great.
Right. And Christians definitely have mixed feelings about astrology, and the Bible is definitely not complimentary of using astrology to dictate your life or um, to be your religion. But the Bible does talk several times about the stars telling of God's glory and His wonders, and so God created the constellations, but He created them as more he uses them more as measuring devices. The analogy that the lawyer uses is a thermometer. A thermometer doesn't give you a fever; it just lets you know that you have one. So, the stars don't direct your path; they just, they can be a signpost for what is happening or what will happen.
Right. And with Jesus' birth, it's not because the stars aligned the certain way that they did that Jesus is Jesus. Jesus is Jesus because Jesus was Jesus. So
Well put.
that was a lot of Jesus and wases.
Right.
But
and not one of them in vain.
and the stars just announced that.
Right, and it was really like at every stage saying, this is what's going on right now, far away, to anybody who could take the time to look.
Right.
The problem is you had to be very attentive to notice this stuff.
Right, with the conception of Christ especially,
Right.
because it was very subtle but very
Yes.
powerful because of how Jupiter was moving over Regis, that it actually meant something.
Right. Because it went in retrograde 3 times.
Hmm.
So there's like once would be okay, king, but 3 times it's king, 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 and so that's what really and I mean all of this is the retrograde is just in relation to our position and Jupiter's position, the way we're moving. Not as much, um, Jupiter's orbit doesn't do corkscrews, neither does the star, uh,
Right.
the Rex star, Regulus or
Regulus, Rex,
yeah,
Regis,
Regis
all mean the same thing.
King,
Regal meaning
right?
king.
Yeah. It's just that that's how it appeared, based on what we can observe.
Hmm.
So, and I mean, and God knew that, you know.
Right, and it's and like how it all came together.
Hmm.
That's why it was important. Because another thing they touch up on in the documentary is, the people knew the stars.
Hmm.
Like they were intimate with them because it's like arid and warm
Hmm.
in the Middle East. So occasionally, like in the summer, they would sleep on their roofs because it was above ground and above ground level and a bit cooler than being inside of the house. And so what you'd see when you sleep on your roof, looking up,
Stars,
precisely. And so
pinholes in the curtain of night.
and so everyone saw the stars. They understood a rough thing with constellations and stuff,
Hmm.
but you had to be especially attentive and like watching like the Magi did.
Hmm.
um Magi and wise men, that's the same thing.
Right,
The people who watched the stars were the Magi, and these were the people who were being attentive because they didn't just watch the stars before they fell asleep. They watched the stars because that was their job.
hmm,
That's what they did. That's what they
right.
studied for.
And they studied the movement of the stars and everything like that. So it was a very intense part of their um, role was tracking all this stuff. So they're probably the only ones who saw all of it.
Right.
So it was probably like
That's why it meant so much
to
to
them.
them because
And yeah, they
it's like
started a very long journey. Now, I mean, like today's, locomotion and planes, trains, automobiles, it wouldn't, it would take a day to get from Babylon,
riches in
Iraq
Iraq to
to
Jerusalem
Jerusalem.
to just south of that to Bethlehem.
It might take a couple days, but this was, it took them over a year, didn't it? Almost 2 years to get there.
At least it was several months.
Yeah,
It was not a short amount of time, and that's part of why like star had to endure this sign had to endure over time.
right. I know it's important to note. The census took a long time, so Joseph and Mary had to stay in Bethlehem for an extended period so they could do the whole census bit.
Right, and I mean, yeah, and like the wise men didn't get there until like Jesus was a toddler. It was a young boy.
Right, exactly.
Like that's why King Herod was ordering all the boys like under 2 to be killed, not just newborns.
Right. So
Like
that's
anyone that was close under like any sort of closeness to this sign, just kill them all.
right, and it took them, yeah, about a year and a half, year and a half to get there. So here's the funny thing. Um, More misleading ministries. I guess this kind of counts, doesn't it? Jesus was not born on December 25th.
Nope.
I don't think anybody who's done any studying actually believes that.
Right. Well, and it's like it's not like catastrophic to say. I mean, like we
No.
celebrate Jesus' birth. Like you don't celebrate someone's birthday like on a leap year on the day of a leap year ever, unless like every 4 years. But um, so it's like we do celebrate Christ's birthday on December 25th, but he was probably born September or June, something like that. And
I think
he 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 said like September or like June, July, something. And it also makes sense for it to be like a summer month because
July or August. I think is what it
because
was.
the like Leo is also a
Yeah, it's a summer sign. Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, I got friends who are um, Leos, and their birthdays are in August. So
right. So
late August, September. So anyway, um, all that to say, uh, Jesus was definitely not born on December 25th. However, the wise men got to Bethlehem on December 25th.
yes, and you can see that in the documentary.
Yeah.
I'm gonna
Link that in the
link that in the
description.
description because it's definitely something everyone should watch. Like anyone who's curious about this thinks it's neat, like we do. Should totally watch it.
Yeah. Now the astronomical
Hashtag not
things,
sponsored.
right? The astronomical data in there is 100% correct because you can check it yourself with what this guy did. This is 100% true.
Right, and they also like on their website, it's the Star of Bethlehem like .net or
Something
something.
like that.
They also give you like names of other programs that you can get like for free or nearly free that run well enough, and then you can pay for better ones.
Sure. Um, his interpretation of those events is, I think, spot on, and it's also an interpretation of those events. It's not something. It's not thus saith the Lord. It's just
Right.
a good interpretation of the data from a certain point of view. Um, there's no such thing as absolute proof. It just doesn't exist.
But
But
this evidence points strongly to it, or like that because of these things lining up, because Jesus was born. Jesus, like
right,
in my history classes, there is at least a historical Jesus.
right, and no serious scholars deny that. There's a few French people who want to say, I think they just made him up. Well, no one really thinks that they just made Jesus up.
Right.
They would prefer that they made up all the stuff about the miracles and the virgin birth and
with
the
the
resurrection.
star.
Right.
That's another thing because people want to say that
It never really
that
happened.
it never really happened. It was just like a myth that they added to add some more weight. But seeing this, like
That's not. It's not
these celestial bodies actually happened
right.
and acted the way it's described in the Bible.
Right. Yeah.
And like with how planets work, it is possible for this to happen
And
because it has.
and in fact it did. So that's the whole point. I'm not.
That adds validity.
Yeah. I mean this documentary gave me goosebumps. It blew my mind. I was very impressed with all of it. And you can't take this to your atheist friend and say, see how stupid you are. Well, because
One, that's not how you approach the conversation.
exactly. And two, this is the kind of thing that exists to bolster your faith, not create faith in others. Just with any kind of apologetic stuff.
Yeah.
But it is a fantastic bit of information. It's a great documentary. I wish it had gotten more. I think it got a lot of traction in the church back in the day.
Right, but because it's not necessarily a thing that's like growing
right.
that I know of.
No, well, I mean, and it's 13 years ago.
Yeah.
This thing was originally produced back in like 2007, and it's done pretty well for a church Bible study thing. I mean, it's done very well. It's not quite as good as a professional documentary, but definitely better than any other like church documentary I've seen with this kind of subject matter. And he does a good job not making it dry by not saying so. So here you've got this star moving into this position. He does a good job.
Right, and
this
like
is basically
music and stuff. I had a good time watching it.
No, I
had a great time learning from it.
I enjoyed both. Yeah, no, it's great. It's just one of those things where you're gonna get really excited. You want to tell people about this, and I don't blame you. But non-believers aren't going to get much out of it.
Right.
because that's just how they are. I mean, but show your friends who are open to it. Absolutely. Anybody who's got an open mind would definitely have a hard time just denying.
Yeah, it would be like someone who's open to hearing things. Like it would be hard to just completely dismiss this as whatever.
Right. It's like that.
Because
That's a lot of coincidences, but it's just coincidences,
right,
which is a ridiculous thing to think. But
right, a lot of
someone right.
coinkydinks.
Yeah. So that's another misleading ministry. People will say Christmas is just stolen from the pagans. Some of the traditions might be
Right, like
some
the
of the
tree, like the Christmas tree.
sure some of the decorations and ideas might have like pagan rituals may have seeped in. However, the December 25th date does actually have significance from the Christian perspective.
Right, and even, I mean, back then they didn't care. They weren't even using our calendar.
Well, it was always the equivalent. I mean,
right,
once they made the new calendar, it was like, okay, wait. What day would Christmas be based on that old calendar?
well, right,
December 25th. Got it.
well,
Okay.
right, and that's what I'm saying. Like
Yeah.
for them, they weren't like, it's like, oh wow, that actually lines up with when we celebrate.
No, that's the
So
whole.
that's why it's neat.
So so December 25th is the day the wise men arrive with the presents. So that actually makes a lot of sense,
Right.
like why we picked that day, because it's kind of close to the winter solstice, but I mean, but that kind of varies from year to year, and you don't really, the winter solstice almost never falls on December 25th. So having such a specific date, it's like why'd they pick that date? It's like well, it must have been a pagan ritual. It's not.
Right, and I mean, right, and like, isn't that like all based off of some like lunar calendar or something? So it's always going to change, like which date, as in it's not
Yeah,
always going to be like the 12th of December.
yeah.
It's going to be like the whenever the moon is a certain way.
Yeah.
So it's not the same date.
Right. The
Um,
solstice. Yeah,
right.
it moves around.
But with Christmas, it is the same date. It is always the 25th of December, but it might be on a Friday, like this year.
Well, well, yeah.
But yeah.
But I mean, the whole point is like they picked that date for a reason. So you can say, well, okay, I'm not going to discount the fact that there are parallels between some of the things that we do on Christmas and some of the things the pagans did this time of year. However,
It's not like a one for one thing.
it's not complete one for one thing. And we celebrate on the 25th, and we give. And the fact we give gifts is right in line with what happened 2,000 years ago, not long after Jesus was born in the city of Bethlehem.
Yeah.
And that's one of those, you know, bittersweet kind of things with the Christmas stuff. But that made my day. Oh, December 25th is a significantly Christian date. And the thing about it is, it even says in the Bible, Mary stored up all these things in her heart. So she remembered, it would imply that she went out of her way to remember everything about what happened that night and later.
Right.
And so that was all really, it's really cool stuff. And however, so when people say we're seeing a Christmas star this year, it's gonna look close, but it's not the same.
Right. And yes, because like we were saying, watch this in the documentary. We're gonna put a link in the description for sure. But definitely watch the documentary, and when you watch the documentary, he'll talk all about how it was Jupiter and Venus coming together and then converging, not covering each other up, but like this, and that made them
Were they kind of
like they touched and
yeah,
like they like crossed a little bit, but
they got so close that no observer could tell that there were two different planetary bodies. They would have looked like one thing, but the
right,
biggest, brightest thing in the sky that night.
right, and so it came together to become very, very bright, and with how planets move and all that. But anyways, it was Jupiter and Venus, the king planet and the mother planet.
That's what we saw 2,000 years ago. And what we're going to see in a couple of days here, coming up on the 21st, is Jupiter and Saturn. So not the same convergence as in the time of Jesus.
Right, and it's like think what you will, like whatever you think like Jupiter and Saturn might mean.
Mm-hmm.
It's not this Christmas star that people are hyping up.
Right. It is a different celestial event, and this is the closest they've been since what you said 18.
This is the closest it's been since like the 1200s.
Right, and visible, closest and visible.
Closest and visible since the 1200s.
Right.
It was also they've never been like this close since the 1200s, but it's the closest since like 16 something whatever.
Gotcha.
So from 1600s whatever to now, they've been farther apart than what they're going to be.
Right. So so it's definitely a rare event. It's definitely going to be cool to look at. What this is a thermometer of, who knows?
Right.
But just it's a different event than they saw in the night sky above Bethlehem.
Right, because we can look back and see with all of these programs and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And there's a lot of criteria for it to meet to really be a Christmas star,
right.
Which is what we kind of went over. We went over, like which bodies it was, what they had to represent, birth, Jewish nation, kingship, all of that. Rising in the east when ahead of the Magi.
And had to be something Herod would have missed.
Right. Which he did. And then the Magi came into town and they were like, hey, yo, we're looking for this kid. And King Herod was like, oh,
huh?
Why?
What?
That's why.
That's interesting. Well, when you come back through, let me know where you find him.
Right.
So I can worship him too. And by worship, he meant stick a sword in.
Yeah.
Luckily, they got some different information and went home a different way.
Right. Magi bounced.
They're like, nope.
Nope. And the whole stopped over Bethlehem thing, that's also a neat.
That is interesting to at least mention. I mean, the documentary is going to explain it better. But obviously, a star can't stop in the sky.
Planets can appear to stop.
Planets can appear to stop when they go into retrograde, which is exactly what Jupiter did.
Right.
On December 25th.
Right, that is precisely what Jupiter and Venus did.
And Venus did, yeah.
Together. Because what ends up happening is, because what planets do is they go retrogradation, like whoop, whoop. Oh, and for the people listening on podcast platforms, they go one way, and then they come to what looks to be a stop, and then go the other way.
Right.
And that's what Jupiter and Venus did. So it looked like it stopped and stayed over Bethlehem when the Magi rolled in.
Right. And that gives me chills right now.
Right.
Because that what doubters say is there's no way a star just stopped right over a city. And it's like, okay, technically you're correct, but perceptively you're wrong.
Right. It's like, yeah, there's no way a star can stop, but planets can appear to stop.
Planets can absolutely appear to stop, and that's exactly what happened.
Mm-hmm. And another thing, all of these things are really neat. All of these things coming together. All of these things coming together is what's important, because if all of these signs, if you just saw them, it's like, okay, whatever. But the fact that they all came together, and that's really neat.
Mm-hmm.
All these signs coming together means something. It's a little bit of a different tangent. We kind of see that in our own lives.
Mm-hmm.
It's like when we're trying to figure out what's going on with our lives and like what God's trying to tell us. It's like little things coming together.
At the same time,
things lining up a certain way. It's like, oh, okay. It's not like a nebula blowing up in the sky. It's subtle but powerful.
Right.
And that's a really neat thing in how God acts sometimes.
And here's one of those subtle but powerful things. Since the universe is like clockwork, it's very measurable and predictable, then it could be argued that when God created the universe, at the moment of creation, he knew the moment he would enter it. And he created the cycle in the stars that would foretell it in precise and compelling detail to anybody who was watching.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just
right. Right. Like all these things come together. And it's like, well, that's neat. And then you think of the deeper implications of that, of these constellations coming together, of these celestial bodies lining up in this way. The implication of that being that God knew when he set the clock.
Right.
In a way for us to see it and understand it and give him glory.
Right.
When the time came and when we saw the indicators.
Right. It's just very few people saw the indicators. It was literally just the Magi in Babylon and the shepherds and the flocks that night. And they had help from the angels.
Right. Right. The documentary doesn't talk too much
it
about
doesn't talk,
it doesn't talk anything about the shepherds.
No, it doesn't say anything about the shepherds. Because we can't speak to their experience. They said angels showed up.
Mm-hmm.
They said all this cool stuff happened. They said they saw a star, which is all great. But all he could comment on was what the sky looked like that night.
Right.
And even the shepherds were like, okay, I see this star, but then it's like, oh yeah, that star, that's because of the. But shepherds were probably they looked at the stars a lot too.
Yeah, they looked at the stars, but it wasn't to study them necessarily. It's like that's
that's
neat.
neat. Yeah, no, exactly. It's like they didn't know what it meant. They were just like that. I've never seen that before. You ever seen that before?
Right. All right, get out.
Get out. So. We don't like the cat to walk across the table. We don't mind snuggles, but we would prefer she didn't walk across the table. So here we are. Yeah, that's and it's good, just so important to at least look at this, because it did great things for my faith. Might do good things for yours, and just understand that. And he explains how, aren't you talking about astrology? Well, okay, yeah, we kind of are, but we're not talking about astrology as a spiritual force in our lives that directs us or, shapes us. We're talking about it as that's a signpost. What does this mean?
Right. And like astrology is, oh, you were born under Leo, so you are this kind of person. What we're saying is like, that's not it. The stars do not make what's going on. They just announce it.
And because of some deep-seated, possibly even God-ordained processes, multiple cultures assign very similar attributes to these constellations. And so
And um and like another important note, like with astrology, it's like some people in astrology, like with the Chinese zodiac,
that's a year thing, yeah.
a year thing, but and if there are people that try and plan to have kids during certain years. That's just part of the culture.
Right.
And so they plan to try and have kids during certain years because supposedly their kids are supposed to be a certain way if they're born in this year. That's not what we're talking about.
No.
Because you do not plan, because with that, the stars make what's going to happen.
Right.
We just, like with this, all of these things lining up, it's like,
okay, so this is what's happening.
Right. It's not because of because of me trying to plan to do something. It's going to be bolstered by the stars.
Right.
That's not what it is.
Right. So, and just briefly, it's like, well, okay, you said all this stuff about, Jupiter and Venus, and that being one thing. What about Jupiter and Saturn? What kind of signpost is that? So that's an excellent question. Neither one of us are experts on either of these things. So all we could do is we looked hard enough. I mean,
we did like a little bit, like a bit more than a cursory Google search. Like
Right.
I read, like I
We actually
skimmed
read some
through.
articles. We
I
skimmed through some articles, looked at Wikipedia, stuff like that. So don't give this any more credence than.
don't like take this with a very large grain of salt because we do not know what we're talking about.
No, it's all about what other people are talking about. And given this guy doesn't really talk about like these planets and things like they have personalities, he talks about these planets and things as what they represented to people on the most basic level, on the you know. So we're not going to get into who Zeus was, or who Jupiter was, or who Saturn was, or who Cronus was. Um, the whole point is what you have with those two things is you've got two kings who oppose each other coming close in alignment. I mean, coming close, not in alignment. Yeah, yeah, in alignment.
They're getting close together. They're conjunction
Yeah,
here.
yes.
They're
They're forming. Yeah, this is
um
a conjunction involving two opposing kings coming together at the same time.
right. It's like and like oh with what I've read, Jupiter and Saturn, they mean mean or like represent like opposite things.
Yeah, because they're
Or
definitely two different
yes,
kings.
they're two different things, and it's different than like something that's like there's a difference between different but complementary.
Right. These are not complementary.
These are different. Like the difference between being generous and overflowing and having prosperity that way versus which is typically assigned to Jupiter and Saturn, which achieves prosperity by limiting itself.
Right. So the even that is could be reading too much into it as
Right.
far as but it's basically like polar opposites is a good way to put it. Polar opposite representations of kings are coming close together. That's the best way.
And understand, we don't know what we're talking
We
about. This is
we don't know what that means. We don't know what it's supposed to signify. We're not going to
and
comment on that.
we don't even know like if like how we're interpreting or what we've read about Jupiter and Saturn is how like what we should be applying. So it's
But in every in every like representation of Jupiter and Saturn, they are definitely two kings who oppose each other. That's the
they're
highest level basic interpretation of everything. And I'm not going to try and comment on what that means. I'm not going to try and comment on what God's trying to tell you with that. It's just that at the same level of, this is the king planet and this is the mother planet coming close together. In that same regard, this is one king and the king that opposes him coming together. That is
right and right like when we saw like what's typically called the king planet, what's typically called the mother planet or the woman planet, coming together with Jupiter and Venus, with the Star of Bethlehem, what they call the Star of Bethlehem, the celestial bodies of Bethlehem to be astronomically correct, um, ish, um, with that like how people interpreted that, and then now with this two opposing bodies. I feel more comfortable saying opposing bodies
sure.
than kings, but
I
um,
mean, it's just that Saturn's always depicted as another king, the king that came before Jupiter.
I but
Either
anyways,
way, doesn't matter.
opposing bodies, opposing kings, whichever one you want to take, with
Yes, I mean,
salty, salty talk right here. Like,
we're not claiming to be any level of authority. We're not claiming to know what it means. We're just saying, since we're throwing this out there and we're saying this is not this,
right, since we're saying what's happening now is not what happened then.
then it's only fair for us to say, well, what is happening now then? And we don't know. But the least um, psychologically interpretive view of these two things, what we just described. And I don't want to go too deep because you can't just start describing personality attributes of planets necessarily, but it's fair to say that these are the things that were always associated with these two planets, the symbolism that goes along with them. And since we can use a symbolism for the birth of Christ, we can use a symbolism for whatever's going on now. But I'm not gonna, yeah. All I can say is what I have said. So I guess we can.
Yeah, and I think it's about just to sum it up, because we always sum it up at the end. What happened then? Here's what happened then. With the conception of Christ, Jupiter crowned Regus, the king planet crowned the king star, over Virgo,
Well, yeah.
the Virgin planet. Also,
Well,
Regus
that's the constellation.
That's the constellation.
Yeah,
right.
Virgo's the constellation.
My bad. Virgin constellation. Thanks for catching that. And then also Regus is an important is part of the Leo constellation, which is representative of the of Judah.
The tribe of Judah.
The tribe of Judah. The Jewish house that is supposed to bring the Messiah into the world. Conception of Christ. And the celestial bodies that the wise men, the Magi, used to get to Bethlehem. Jupiter, king planet, and Venus, mother planet, come together to become...
Yeah. I think this is the night he's born. No, my friend. This is the night he's born that you see them come together the closest and the brightest.
Right, and then because it endures over a long time, they follow the star or this astronomical body to get to Bethlehem. That's why this works out.
Right.
Because it took them a long time to be like, oh, go sign, as I understand it, watching the documentary and stuff.
Right.
Go sign goes to Bethlehem.
Right. And I can't remember exactly if they were still in convergence by the time they got to Jerusalem, when Herod's castle, or just to talk to Herod, or if it was just Jupiter that was up there. I can't remember exactly. But either way, Jupiter definitely went into retrograde right above Bethlehem.
Right.
Then. But I don't know if they were still in convergence by the time the wise men got there, because it was like 6 months later. I don't think.
And I think
12 months later.
It still was.
Yeah.
But that's why I need to watch the documentary.
Right.
Where was I? Yeah. King planet, mother planet comes together. All of that. Very neat things. And then we also talked about how the king planet, the mother planet coming together. That's what it meant. That came together with Christ. It was a signpost that indicated that something big happened.
Right, and happened right here.
Right here. And so that meant something, and what's happening now is not that.
Is not that.
Because Jupiter and Saturn do not mean like a royal birth. That's not what it represents. Like, no, and that is the thing. No matter who you talk to,
it's not going to mean. It like, would not possibly mean.
Any interpretation of this would not mean royal birth. It could be a royal something, but it ain't going to be a royal birth.
Right.
So that's how we definitely know that it does not mean what it meant then.
Right.
It's going to be a cool thing. It's a big, like, astronomical thing that's happening near Christmas, so whoop-de-doo, but it's not then. It's not what it meant then.
Right.
So take that for what you will. And to, put a cap on that thing, to wrap all of that up, put a bow on it. The bow is this. Watch the Star of Bethlehem documentary.
Right.
It's free on YouTube.
Yeah. Absolutely.
We watched it on YouTube
last night.
Last night to freshen up for this podcast, for this conversation.
And we'll put a link in the description.
Yes. So look up the Star of Bethlehem. You can also look it up. Now you're gonna have to go down a bit. It's not gonna be the first thing that comes up because there's so much stuff happening because of the Star of Bethlehem now. But scroll down a bit You'll see the Star of Bethlehem, like .net, .org, not .com, I don't think. Click on it, you'll see, um, you'll see it. But
Right. All right, but both links will be in the description.
yes,
All right.
check it out. And with that,
Like, subscribe, follow.
like, subscribe, follow, share the video,
Comment. Comments help.
comment.
We're not going to read them. Just trust. He's not going to read the comments. But
I mean,
make the comments. Okay, we might read the comments.
we might read the comments. Like, share, comment, subscribe, definitely whatever you do for this video, do more for the Star of Bethlehem documentary.
Sure.
And with that, will you please pray us out?
Sure. Dear God, never let us miss the signs of your glory and your plan at work around us and in our lives, so that we can go join your work or do the work you have for us. And I just ask that maybe not watch the skies, but help us to look and see your hand and know where we can join your work. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.